Okay, so we're back again for another episode of the FLT. Today we're joined by Riina. Riina, thank you for coming. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you today?
I am very, very good.
Very
After a couple of good meetings, lovely to be here speaking with all of you.
Great, it's great to have you. Welcome. When we started this podcast, one of the things that I wanted to make sure we grabbed a hold of in terms of perspectives was a Finnish leader that had dedicated themselves to a thesis and then taken that beyond Finland. So grown an audience, grown a community, grown international recognition. And when I tried to think of, okay, who do I know who's been able to make such an impression with so many companies at such a large scale, you were top of the list. So it is a real honor and a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm also very happy about where life has taken me.
you certainly should be. That's great. Annalie, we've prepared, as we always do, a brief introduction for Riina.
Sure. All right, here we go, Riina. Let's see if you recognize yourself from this. So I looked you up, and here is what I found. As we say in Finnish, a dear child has many names, and here are some describing you. On LinkedIn, a customer testimonial about you states the following: if you are looking for a magic agile wand that will night today solve all your HR problems through getting everyone certified or trained, Riina is definitely not your go-to person. Why? Because she knows it's bullshit. Another customer calls you Pippi Longstocking of Agile because you help teams and leadership teams to go where they haven't dared before. Robert Galen in his blog calls you a non-nonsense straight shooter who you can tell has lots of experience collaborating with leadership teams. You hold a Master of Science degree in technology and a Master's degree in applied neuroscience. You also are a CSP, a CSM, a CSPO, and a Safe Agilist, i.e. a certified Scrum professional, a certified Scrum Master, a certified Scrum product owner, a scaled Agile framework Agilist, and to top it up, a Scrum at Scale trainer. In 2010, you started a movement and founded the Agile HR community, a small boutique consultancy and a learning community. In 2020, you co-authored the book Agile HR, Delivering Value in the Changing World of Work, which is a practical guide for people, professionals, and leaders that makes you a Finnish HR professional who has published internationally through an international publisher and with rights sold to other languages, even Chinese. You are based in Helsinki, Finland. You and your team work globally with big Fortune 100 and 500 companies from Australia to the USA, including Netflix or ANZ Bank in Australia. Your own role is focusing on executive agile advisory and supporting organizational transformations and changes. You think that today's world works like an organism. It's a network defined through social interactions, transparency, and non-hierarchical communications. However, you still today encounter many company cultures based on the principles of Taylorism, dating back to 1911, principles which were designed to minimize mistakes in factory work and improve worker productivity. You also recommend that every leader should step outside their immediate domain of expertise to learn continuously. You also say that an HR professional should not just view HR trends, but visit, for example, Slush once a year. And Slush is the world's leading non-profit startup event held every November in Finland. So, does this describe you? And why should a corporate HR visit the Slush?
You've done a good homework. Thank you very much, Annalie. Yes, so that's me, or part of me, absolutely. I found myself in description through, as I said previously, I'm not that keen of mentioning all my certifications, etc. But for some people, it's important to know what sits behind that. And yeah, why do I want to encourage HR professionals, HR leaders to look beyond just their domain and go to Slush? I was visiting Slush maybe very early days. And when I was there as a HR leader, I started recognizing all the early signs of trends. What's going to happen with our world of work? What's going to happen with technology? Where is this going? What are these amazing small teams already doing with so small budgets? And that really is opening up your mind to see a bit beyond just your organization. So you're not siloed in your own organization with the big stuff going on that takes ages. These teams are moving so quickly, and that really was inspiring also me to look into Agile more. I'm not just slush, but one other example is MIT Media Lab. If you want to know what's cooking in technology in the world in 10 years, look into what MIT Media Lab is doing, because it is mind-blowing stuff that's coming out from there. And you need to shake things up and wake things up as a HR professional. You can't just sit there and do the same things that you've done for 20 years. Yeah, and a leader as well, right. Not just HR.
Thank you. That's inspiring.
Do you think, I mean, for the average people leader or for the average HR, they have the, let's say, capability to translate things that go on in Slush or in the MIT lab into, I don't know, planning or strategy development in their own organizations, in your experience?
I think the maturity on a tech, analytics, AI, kind of what's going on in the big world has grown a lot during the last 10 years. There are different types of people working, if we just take HR, which is my domain, different types of people working in HR, and both are needed. Some are the ones that are keeping operations running, trustworthy processes, standardizing, delivering that basic foundational so that every organization can have a proper people foundation. Then there are people who are looking beyond just today. What's going to happen tomorrow, in 10 years, in 5 years? How do we build capabilities, strategies? Who do we hire? How do we build leadership? That's not something that you can just kind of put on or off on a policy. So all of these things should be affected by a view forward, right? So, and I see these people are very talented, very open, very curious. So yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's I recognize those two distinctions of HR, right? So you have your developmental focused and then your operational. I often find, I mean, my own personal experience is sometimes these two groups have a pretty heated internal conflict, because quite often if you're developmentally focused and you're looking at new technology, you're kind of entering into the domain of systems and processes, which is usually the domain of your operational staff.
I like to call it a tension, and it's usually a very creative tension between either, in HR, it's these two worlds. If you look at operational side and sales side of organizations, that the same tension is there. If you look at R&D, you have R&D people who are very innovative, and then you got the supply chain looking at what are you doing? We can't deliver with that pace. So it's the same tension is there, and I think if you can use that tension creatively and pull the organization step by step with you, that's where you can use the tension well. Because I've also seen situations where people are too much up in the clouds and do not understand how the real reality works. And that's not a good place to be either.
That's true.
So Riina, with your experience, with your kind of expertise and your experience of working with lots of leaders and globally as well, so how would you define your leadership philosophy, and how was it shaped up? Through what kind of experiences?
Okay, so one of the key things is that I have a sports background. I've been playing handball, so European handball, which is a very aggressive, physical sport, team sports, for 19 years? Also in the league. And saw many different coaches and saw the dynamics of a team in all kinds of situations. I wasn't very good myself, so I wasn't the star player, but I had certain qualities that were very helpful in the field. And usually that is how I could get others to play together. So I already then used my skills that I use now in work life as well. Then I think that what has really affected me, like any one of us, is to have a fantastic boss. To have one or two fantastic, amazing bosses that brings the best out in you. And then those horrible ones as well. So you have both. So if somebody who is a listener has a horrible boss, take it as a learning and then get out, So there is a lot to learn from that as well. I think a couple of things that I really appreciate in leadership, and I try to live up to that myself. One of the things is reliability. If you say something, don't say things that you can't stand behind. Don't say things that change in 2 months or 1 month if there isn't a clear reason to that and you can communicate that. So reliability. Another thing which I am a big advocate of is transparency. So transparency to the level that is possible, because understanding, of course, being realistic, everybody can't know everything in a company. There are certain limits and constraints, but treating people like adults and sharing as much as possible so that you can do your job well. That is what I'm advocating for. Then there is something why I'm so seeked after as in teams and organizations is clarity. There is so much unclarity, so much complexity, so much ambiguous stuff going on where people don't know who is making decisions, what do they have rights to do. So that clarity, and that's situational. So you have to keep on having a clarity, keep on aligning people together so that we know what we're doing, because moments shift, things shift all the time.
And I think that situational awareness, that shared situational awareness is extremely important for that clarity.
Yeah.
So people understand why we are changing,
and the sense making.
Yeah, exactly.
The sense making together, to making time for that as well. Then I thought about this, that everybody are now talking about freedom and self-organization and all of these things where we're and I can see this being misused in so many cases, saying, go and do something, be free, you have responsibility, but there are no guidelines, no frameworks, no constraints whatsoever. And that is where I find great leadership is giving you the constraints. So balance between rules and policies and innovation and freedom. And those are clear. So here are the boundaries. Go and finalize, do whatever you need to, figure this out with your team. But this is a boundary. If this is touched, we need to go and speak with that department. If this is touched, I want to be aware of that and I want to be participating. If you need this much money, we need to go to the finance, So there is a clear understanding of what's our playground, and then we can go. Then one thing that I added as well, because when I thought about, this is from my recent 3-4 years, when I worked with quite large organizations with leaders there, I sometimes lack financial clarity. People who can speak about numbers so that others understand what they are saying. What are the biggest cost posts in our organization? How do we make profit? Where does revenue come from? Which are the biggest products? People who can translate the business logic through numbers to others. I think that is a really rare trait, and I really appreciate that. These are some of the things that I kind of thought about. And then the big why. I think if you're a leader, you can again help people create sense together around, why is this happening? Why are we doing this? What's the purpose of our team? So that you can always refer back to that in a world which is full of priorities, full of conflicts, is going back to that why. Okay, this is why we're here. We've got 10 things that we are asked to be doing. 5 of them are within the sphere of our why. Let's prioritize those.
I sometimes feel when I do communications for executives, etc., I feel that, yes, we give clarity, we create clarity for the employees, but the sort of contextualization is often lacking. What I mean with that is we're not sharing what were the options of why we chose these 5 things as priorities.
Right. So the logic.
And also what were the options? What did the world look like when we started narrowing it down?
Yeah. So am I understanding you correctly, is that you're not bringing people along to the sense-making journey. You're talking about the end result of a sense-making journey. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
That's usually how a lot of corporate comms, I'm afraid, works these days, right? So you get the message in a sense, but then also the message is tweaked so that the language is proper and it's safe and it doesn't kind of expose anybody to particular risk. But then obviously you lose a little bit of the context and the rest of it. Because if I can also read a little bit between the lines of where your focus is with leadership. The lessons you get from handball, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure the most common injury in handball is a broken nose. Is that? I think it's
knees and ankles.
Knees go, but I know the elbows are very
Yeah.
useful. Anyway, but it's a contact sport. But in handball, like in any sport, the rules of the game and the objective and the purpose is pretty much, it's known by all players.
Yeah.
And so the focus, I think, in a lot of companies is to try and set that definition of, this is the game.
Yeah.
This is how we win. This is where we move forward. Quite often when you try to bring large groups with you, it's quite difficult to set that context definitively in that setting.
I agree. Going back to what you said, if we, some people hate sports metaphors, absolutely hate them. It works for me, so let's use that. Sometimes you've got to go back to the basics. So when you're a sports person, you do the basic drills over and over and over again. And sometimes in organizations, when you focus on the fancy stuff and all that, you forget about the basics as well. So one of the basics with communications, of course, two-way communications, is if we're communicating about strategy, about the changes, about transformation, let's make sure that there's two ways. Let's make sure that it's a dialogue. Let's make sure that we embed this in teams so they can actually talk about it and transparently share what's coming up. So there's a lot of that there, the basics and foundations. And when you go back to that, everything seems so much clearer.
Yeah. And I think there is no behavioral change unless you dialogue stuff. You are able to challenge, you're able to get answers to your questions in a safe way. And that safety sometimes is lacking, of course. Yeah.
I can tell a story. I was working with an agile transformation in a technology and hardware company, training people like hardcore engineers. Engineer, like proper 30 years doing the same thing, like very talented, but very narrow focus. And I was training agile to these leaders and kind of high potential people. And there was a person sitting like this in the back of the room, very angry, looking at me. Half a day I was looking at that. And then during lunchtime, I went to ask him that, hey, what's going on with you? Can you share that? What's on your mind? And he said, I'm not buying this at all. And I don't think this is the right way to go. And told me why. And he had a job where he was responsible of the certifications from EU, right? Very waterfallish. You need to have all the papers in place. You need to have all the details correct to send anything into the EU so they can get certification for a hardware gadget, right? And I said, you're right. You shouldn't be agile at all. You shouldn't be thinking that I'm trying to push this on you, but your peers in R&D, your supply chain, everything else is going to start working this way. So it's really, really important for you to learn how they're going to start working so that you can tap into and get what you need from them. And he switched around totally. So I think this is coming back to what people call change resistance. I don't think there's a change resistance. People change if it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense to them, they will not change because they are smart adult people who take care of, accountability of their work.
Yeah.
That's also a lovely example of you leaning towards those people who are not necessarily, buying in or are not walking the mile with you. I think that's really important in leaders as well, is just to, walk towards those people, embrace them, understand why they are not with you. And then, that way you sometimes might be able to bring them along or then not.
Or then learn something which some of these critical, hardcore professionals in organizations sit on very detailed information, and they've just made it work. And you're coming with a change. And of course they're concerned of, okay, this is not going to work and it's very critical. So you better listen to them to understand what's real, what is a no-go, what is a constraint, and what is a mindset shift that we can help with to make collaboration easier. If you're not going to be, sitting up and waving a flag of agile, at least that you appreciate what it is and how we can collaborate together better.
How it can work for you.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
the resistance to change is one core thing to overcome for successful agile transformation. What are some of the other things that a successful companies get right to make agile transformation work?
I think one of the key, if we start from the beginning, one of the key things with bigger transformations and whatever the transformation is, agile or whatever else, is bring people along to understand why. So what's the purpose, make sense making, like we talked before. Second, I think that we need to have a couple of waves there. When we look at big transformations, there is what I call a systemic leadership or systemic structures. We need to start looking at the systemic structures, such as performance management, compensation, roles and responsibilities, so that they are understood what they will need to look like. Governance models. I just heard of a fantastic transformation where they started not even with Agile on the team level anywhere. They started with the leadership team going into quarterly prioritization. When the leadership team needed to go into quarterly prioritization, they need to be focused on, okay, what is the funnel in of stuff? What do we have capacity to do what? And they started on the leadership team level, not even speaking about agility, but starting to force the other ones into that cycle as well. And then starting to upskill, then starting to work on team level, etc. Another thing which I think is very, very important is that you don't think this as an on-off change. It is a continuous transformation, continuous journey where you're molding and forming and co-creating the operating model of your organization, the value driving logic, if you may. And it's never going to be ready. It's never going to be perfect. You're going to have problems. It's not a solution that solves all your problems in an organization. So the journey, how you lead that and how you consistently keep the energy going, share what's great and also what's not. So being very transparent about that. These are some elements that I found. And then the metrics. Agility in itself doesn't make any sense. I'm working with agile changes where I usually say, let's not even use the agile language. We don't need that. Let's just use what are we here to do? How does it change value delivery to the customer? How does it change the feedback cycles in our organization? What cycles do we need to start prioritizing and making decisions on because the world is changing so fast? So it's really, again, down to foundations. What's the logic of this organization?
It's such a good point because, I think most people that are in either a leadership or a support role will recognize like a big change comes along, all right, and we're all committed to the change. And then somebody says, hey, yeah, we can do that, but we can't do performance management, or we can't do the talent stuff, or we can't do the leadership stuff. And if you're not encompassing all of it to make a fundamental change for how you want to make that value add for your customers or for business development, it's not going to work. Right? If you do like changes around the outside, but you miss one or two core processes, then you're going to end up with a massive internal chaos.
You're going to have blockers. You're going to have blocks. Yeah. So I'll tell a story again. I was working in a large tech organization, global one with 30,000 people in a unit with about 500 people. We were the first unit to move into a modern operating model, right? This was the fantastic leader, amazing leader. We're starting to transfer hundreds of people into this new model. And suddenly we realized that the performance management structure in this company is to set annual goals for every person without any feedback loops. So we should put, your bonus, what would that be? 8,000 euros a year. 8,000 euros bonus connected to your personal target once a year. And we wanted them to start working in teams. Delivering in teams and iterating along the way, being able to make pivoting if needed, if it makes sense. But everyone has their target set in January to something which isn't relevant any longer.
Yeah.
And this was a major blocker, right? And because I've got a HR background, I wasn't working with HR at all, but the business. I said, I want to sit down with the HR person responsible for performance management and the HR leader and try to explain to them how this model and logic is now changing and figure out, negotiate with them, how can we change the model without changing it for the whole company, right? Had that meeting, they sat there and listened and said, listen, if we want to change something, it takes 2 years. First, preparing for the performance management change, then taking it to the board, getting approvals, blah, 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 and then changing systems, etc. But we found as a Pippi Longström. I found my ways around. So we tweaked it. We agreed to tweak it internally without actually touching the process or system, and we made it work. But this could have been blocking the whole change.
2 years is a long time, because that's 2 years where every day people are making a choice between my personal incentive and the team goal and the like what we're trying to do together.
Yeah, and the other thing is leadership. If I kind of refer back to where we started and what you said, I've changed. One thing has changed during the last 10 years. Previously, I said, yes, we should train and bring leaders along and start teaching them what this new logic is about and how you lead in this new way of kind of modern, more flat organizations where there's transparency and quick iterations, etc. They can learn. Now, 10 years in, I'm saying, how long time can you give these people to learn? How long, what's the cost of delay? So if you have 10 people on your leadership team, 2 people are the kind of early adopters. They're already there as a leader, able to lead this way. 5 people are people who we may be able to move quite fast. And then there are 4 people who might have very important roles who are just not the right persons, just not having what it takes. How long should we wait? 2 years, 3 years for them to sit there and be blockers of moving the organizational model? What does that cost? So we already have now talent out there who are fantastic leaders, who've been doing this job, who have been leading these kind of teams in large, small, big, small companies, industries everywhere. We can start doing those decisions quite fast.
That's a first of all, a fantastic cost of delay that's a brilliant concept. That's something I've not heard before, and I immediately intuitively understand exactly how pressing it is. But second of all, as well, the conversation about leader fit is a very, fundamentally, it's very difficult for, particularly if you're already in a leadership position, for someone to come along and say, hey, that thing that you're good at, I don't need that anymore. I actually need this other thing that you're not good at. Every leader needs to always do a kind of a stock take to see, does my profile still fit this organization? Because it's the worst thing in the world to ask somebody to basically be a different person.
Exactly.
And it's like, and I don't want you to be, if I don't want you to be somebody you're not, but I do need somebody who can do this particular, I can be more flexible, be more outgoing, be more caring for the people around you.
Or the other way around, if there's a crisis situation, we need to push through something. You probably need somebody that isn't that, what's the word in English?
You can say it in Finglish. I don't mind.
Sensitive, if somebody who can push through something that people don't like you and you need to push it through anyway. So sometimes we need those kind of leaders as well.
We do, that's true. That's really true.
Depending on situation.
Yeah.
If we look at the Finnish leadership now from this perspective of leaders fit into agile organizations, so what would be your kind of conclusion? Are Finnish leaders a good fit for agile organizations in general?
In general, I think there are many cultural traits in the Finnish culture that lends itself well to agile leadership. Some of them are consistency, fact-based, so evidence-based, looking at facts and being able to gather new facts and feedback all the time and understand what this means. Reliability and able to give freedom to people while the status layer is status need is quite low in Finland. Is that you have different opinion?
No, you continue.
So usual Finnish leader is like, let's get this job done. I trust you to do that. Let's go type of leaders. Then if you think about leading, what's your human view? I think we need to work on that a bit. I think that there is the product focused versus customer experience focused. That's a lack of knowledge, I think, in the Finnish leadership. We focus on product. We like technology, hardware, gadgets, stuff, and are not that good at turning it into what's the experience that we're generating and connecting business models to that experience, not trying to just push products out. I think that what's good about Finnish leadership or Finnish culture overall is no means no and yes means yes. When you're out there as a Finnish leader and you work with leaders from different parts of the world, I was very confused in the beginning because no didn't, nobody said no.
Yeah.
So you never knew what was no.
Yeah.
There is 10 different ways of saying no, and none of them says no.
Yeah.
And then yes wasn't always a yes. So it is, you need to figure out to navigate that system very differently. And when agility builds on transparency, everybody seeing what's going on, being able to quickly make decisions in the teams, I think these things lend itself well to agility. Then what doesn't lend itself very well in a Finnish leadership is, I think, the being humble, not being able to have those tough negotiations, the sales, the pitching, the trying to go to market in difficult market situations where you got tens of startups doing the same thing, to really kind of stand up and be the visible face towards something. And those situations, I think that we should be able to get help. We should be able to hire somebody who is the pairing up. And I think that is one of the keys to Finnish leaders going to the world, is pair up with somebody who has strengths where you don't have. And those pairs can work really well together.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of acknowledged thing that Finnish leaders expect the work or the product or the artifact to speak for itself, and they don't have to do any promotional work. But particularly in a startup setting, actually the brand, the vibe, the marketing pitch that you put out there is massively important.
Very much so.
Because you're almost by definition dealing with a type of technology or product that doesn't have a track record, right? So everybody has to have a leap of faith with you. Yeah.
Very much so.
So Finns, they fit into agility because they're engineers, and then they don't fit also because they're engineers.
You can say that.
You have nothing to do, and you're listening to the FLT podcast.
You should be studying, and you're listening to the FLT podcast.
Again, we're generalizing here, right?
Yeah.
So there's always amazing individuals who are doing it, but I think they also, the people who I'm seeing who are just really well off internationally, they know how to get help. They know how to buy help or hire help, or so they know how to build that package so that it really delivers value.
That's new. That's very interesting. So in your experiences, so you mentioned actually when you formed your philosophy on leadership, you talked about having a great boss and you talked about having some difficult experiences. Could you give us maybe a little bit more on those, on your best boss and your perhaps nightmare boss? Were they able to ask for help?
Yeah, so the best bosses were even very open about their vulnerability, to say, this is where, very clear on where we're going, super clear, and saying, I don't know how to do that and that. That's why you're here for. You will help me get there. I will help you. I've got the status. I can make decisions. I've got the networks. But come in and help me do that. Usually change management, comms, getting people involved, all of that thing. So they know where to ask for help, and they make it very clear where we're going. And I think that is a massive benefit of great bosses. And then they trust you to do things, and also give you the freedom to navigate. Yes, go and, you don't need to go through me to everybody. Just contact whoever you need to. So giving that permission to navigate the hierarchy, if you may. I usually don't need it, but it's good to have
a mandate.
Yeah, a mandate. Then if we take the other side of the coin, so I'm not even sure if I should mention this, but these are exceptions. These are two narcissists that I've been working with, and I don't usually use that word lightly. But absolutely nightmare for high performers to work with them, because when they say A, a week later, they say that they've said B. And it's, you're starting to think that, am I crazy? You're starting to write things down so you actually know exactly what we spoke. You're writing emails to confirm, was this what we agreed? I'm going to do A, B. So you're starting to micromanage that communication on level, which is, ridiculous. And how they are acting around their people is almost, we were talking about emotional maturity. You can see, when you're old enough, you can see a child there. You can see a child that needs attention, that needs positive reinforcement all the time. and absolutely can't receive any feedback at all. So they're taken aback from specifically my way of working with leaders. Their working status games, I'm really quickly usually I'm not being able to work with them at all.
How did you deal with that situation on a personal level? So, I mean, I think a lot of people could probably resonate with the fact that you've got a boss who is egocentric and is unpredictable, potentially lying, or not lying, but distorting the truth to an extent where you're never sure about which way is up. How do you cope with that?
I'm going to speak about my own experience. What really helped me, think about how to do this. I'm happy that I'm an entrepreneur because I've got always something to fall back to. So when I'm working with these kind of people, I'm quite quickly navigating that. Is this the battle that I want to take? Is this not? If I were internal, and if you meet the worst kind of, there are some really, really not very good bosses out there. Make sure that your market value is high. Make sure that you learn. Make sure that you have something in your CV so that you can get away, because you are not going to stick around to win that battle at all. I've seen a couple of times where like proper hardcore old school engineers or professionals in an organization who are important enough for the operations and saying, this isn't a good boss. They are now making decisions, not considering our customers here or this technology or whatever. And that's going to be a massive risk, and flagging that. And if they are listened to, it might be so that they are looking out for another person to lead. But yeah, difficult situations. But my tip for people who are reporting to people like this, make sure that your market value is high. Start looking for another job.
Yeah, invest in yourself.
Yeah.
You mentioned entrepreneurship, and there are a lot of good people out there who have an own company, who HRs and other companies would like to work with. How do you see that HRs, for example, should support recruiting people, entrepreneurs, into working with corporations? How corporations could benefit best of those?
Very good question. And I think that is changing massively right now, because quite a lot of the younger gens are looking into not even having an employment. They want to have that through their own company. But how do we build talent acquisition pipelines through that? How do we build selection methods for that? How do we build, pricing and invoicing, budgeting for that, right? How do we get in touch with all of these? Because if you're a solo entrepreneur and you're contacting a big company like, there is that just doesn't exist, right? So there needs to be some kind of centralized pool of freelancers or something that these companies are starting to tap into. I don't know, recommendations. If you work with somebody, they could recommend other people, because the networks in the entrepreneurial scene are very, very strong.
Yeah.
Somehow I feel it's quite boring, and this is me being biased, that the big companies always contact the big consultancies who've got the rows of juniors sitting and trying to do the work, doing PowerPoints to you. And there are a lot of seniors who have 20 plus years of experience who could come in and do the same work in 1 hour or 2 hours, or teach you to do the work, than the armies of consultants coming in and doing 50 hours of work. Yeah. So there's a lot there. I love the question. I don't have an answer, but I think companies might benefit a lot from making a strategy for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question.
Excellent.
Yeah, also a good one.
You're biased. You're biased.
My question is the best one now.
We have an eternal competition going on here. Who asks the best question? No, but being serious. So your book, Agile HR. So it was published in 2020, and
the worst year to publish a book.
Right, but okay. So there's really nice publicity out there. There's really nice reviews on Amazon and so on. So I highly recommend it to read the book. But then on the other hand, being academic myself, I noticed that there's a bit of skepticism in academic community about this concept of Agile HR. There's not a lot of research being done. people don't cite the book from an academic side. So do you see that there's some kind of like gap between what practitioners find important and think is important when it comes to this Agile HR, and then what academics think about this area, and why is this the case?
I love your question. Very good question. Yes, so I'm giving you feedback.
Not the best question. Just so you know, like it's up there, but
you'll get a chance.
I'll tell you a story. There was a student from a good university and contacted me and said, "Can I just interview you for my, I think PhD? I'm doing a PhD around modern HR, etc. My professor says I cannot quote your book, but if I interview you, I can quote the interview." I was like, oh, that's interesting. Being the third person to even start speaking about Agile HR in the world, having worked with that now for 14 years, the academic world is not appreciating like boots on the ground experience. But then I said, so what? You know what? Academics, they will catch up. They will do the transformations themselves and write about those and write the cases and follow up and do interviews and do research. And then it comes. So it's fine. I don't really care. I'm happy to participate. That's why I said, happy to share experiences with students, happy if they join our meetups and community. They can learn a lot. I was a student myself here at Aalto. Oh gosh, a long time ago. And my professor Leena-Maija Otala was the one that really inspired me to my career. We were talking about learning organizations and Peter Senji back then. And I came into work life and I was absolutely stunned by how it really worked. After being in, studying, doing my thesis, I thought, idealistic. This is how it should work in theory. But then, boom, not in the reality.
Processes, Excels.
Yes. And now I'm changing the reality instead.
Particularly if you think about how technology and general processes are evolving, it's a good question. Agile HR is absolutely certainly something that is now. It's a good question what HR will actually be in 3 to 5 years from now, right? Because it's kind of a big gap in academia right now about what's the future of HR going to be and how can people processes and leadership processes in particular be more agile in the future. So I hope that you get more calls and more requests to be cited in PhDs, because I think it's a glaring omission.
Well, but I guess the skepticism comes from this idea that we had with so many different things already, like in the past. These fads come and go. How do we know that this is the thing that will stay?
I think about agile not as a word or a theme or a ism. The more complex and fast changing our world becomes, the more we need new ways of working. And thus, mathematically, the world is becoming more complex, faster all the time. Now, the AI revolution is coming in. It's a must. It will change sooner or later, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So I don't even see that there is an option there to stay static. As you know what, if you go to a standard global HR or organization, big one, 35,000 people in the organization, and you scratch the surface of their HR processes, it's the same as it was 20 years ago. The same problems. They don't even have fixed onboarding yet. You had 20 years fixing onboarding. Why is that not done? You've got all the technology there. You got, what? Or now what's going on? I understand elements like learning and development or process development. That's shifting all the time with technology. But certain, really, really simple things. Leadership development. How can that be redesigned every year? We haven't changed as people very much. If you look at neuroscience, there are certain basic principles in place. Work with them. I'm hearing you. All the new niches and all the new fancy stuff coming in. Absolutely. And when you get older, you become like, seen that before.
Yeah.
It's just called something else.
Yeah, everything was done in 1950s already. No.
You know what? Agile is 30 years old.
Yeah, but that's 30 years is a long time. Okay, I'm almost convinced.
You know what? I don't want to convince you. I want you to look into it and maybe convince yourself.
So one question would be that we're really interested in. So if Finnish leaders in general are kind of a good fit for agile organizations, agile ways of working, so why we don't see that many Finnish leaders working abroad, away from Finland?
Ooh, you caught me off guard there with that question. Why are they not abroad? I think there are a couple of things there. One is what we already covered, is the being in forefront figure and really standing up and selling and pitching and all of that. It's not inherent to that many Finnish leaders. The second is the other side doesn't understand the benefits of Finnish leaders very well. So we should be able to even brand Finnish leadership that it goes very well, or Scandinavian leadership, if I may. Scandinavian leadership going very well together with agile models. We haven't done that very well either. And then we tend to be quite humble. So we don't bring up the Finnish leadership. I've spoken about HR people in Finland are super, super talented. And I can't see many of them out abroad. I can't see many having big positions in the big organization or, being abroad. And I wonder why. And I think it's the same dynamics there. We can't sell ourselves very well. And I think we should maybe do that together.
Build a bit of a brand.
That's what we're doing here.
That's right where we are. Yeah, absolutely.
What about your experiences of international managers and leaders? How do Finns compare in general with American leaders or the people that you help in different countries?
It's very easy to speak with Finns and go directly to speak about stuff, content, domain. The trust is there quite quickly. They don't question me as don't need to prove myself to Finnish leaders. They already have done their homework before, right? So there is that very quick, let's start moving. Internationally, it's a lot of relationship building. I need to go so much slower than I do in Finland, of course. So it's around getting to know the organization, getting to know you as a leader, understanding the dynamics in the teams and the organization, the status games and the networks. It is around understanding how to communicate in another way because you can't be that frank and direct. So changing communications a bit. The leaders there are usually kind of having quite big power, much bigger budgets, much more people who report to them. So they are not interested in details as much as Finnish people are. They are more on a kind of strategic level, more about looking into bigger pictures. So you need to be able to, when you work with them, you need to be able to turn what you want to say usually into nice PowerPoints that has the exact thing that they are interested about, and then tweak it. So it's very, very much kind of more senior level, if I may, kind of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like you mirror what in a sense what the audience wants. You're not talking just about, hey, this is where I think we go, but
Exactly.
You have to placate them a little bit and say, okay, you're important, and the thing that you care about is here.
Yes.
Now also we have to
exactly.
get down to business.
And once you get that relationship with these leaders abroad, it's amazing what you can do together, because that's when you then can start that really frank collaboration. It doesn't come from the start, but when it starts, they don't usually want to let go of those kind of relationships because very few people are frank to them. They got very few people around them who give them feedback on the level that they really listen to it. And I think there's something there which is genuinely valuable, but it takes much more longer time to get there.
So for Finnish leaders going abroad, having like a no bullshit attitude is a good thing, but you have to do a little bit of bullshit at the start to get to that space.
Yeah, build, do stakeholder mapping, build the relationship, understand the networks, understand what's been done before and where it's gone wrong before, so that you know. So build that map first. It takes half a year maybe sometimes, and they don't ask you to be usually directly into the game. Sometimes you have the 100 days, right? But and then the thing is, if you're a Finnish leader, one tip that I have for you is figure out 10 ways to say no without saying no. You're going to be better off. I've done my fair share of mistakes there. So, you know what? I think we still have to figure out, talk with the more stakeholders, or I'm not quite convinced that your analysis has been, considering everything. That's a no, but it's, I really appreciate your input. I think we should speak with more of these in these teams, right? So there are ways that you have to hear that no there. And that's been taking a while.
That's a really interesting approach.
So what's your personal favorite that you're using yourself?
No.
Okay. Well, that's very indirect.
And that's good advice for those who are non-Finnish that want to work here. If you just hear no, it's just no. You don't have to keep trying.
Yeah, and it's no. It's more like, hey, we probably need to look into this more. I've got some ideas that I want to kind of bounce off you. I'm not quite sure about myself, but there's something that I've got. So let's take more time to look into this. Something like that would be my, I genuinely appreciate the work you've done. There's certain gaps that I want to see that are considered.
Oh, it sounds like maybe more than no. Yeah. Quite positive.
Okay, great. Riina, you've been very generous with your time. You've given us a lot to think about and a lot of really good nuggets to work with. Thank you very much. It's been a fantastic hour. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was Riina Hellström, and she gave us a lot of her good time and some good thinking about supporting leaders and with an agile approach. How do we feel? Annalie?
I think she was really, really interesting. The point especially that stuck with me was the point of transparency. Transparency in HR don't go in very often hand in hand in practice. Not even today. And I somehow feel that HRs are often missing to use the power of transparency of data for their benefit. So if you are transparent about something that is not going into the right direction, using the data, using the facts on your benefit, you can actually drive decision making with those. And I think I don't see that done enough. And I really like her view on we need more clarity, we need more transparency.
Yeah, it was a good, strong message. Alexei?
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed it as well. She has a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, and she's very precise in how she formulates things, so which was great, to the point, as the original description that Annalie developed actually indicated. So it was true. So she did, I think, really good job kind of dissecting Finnish leadership. I think really kind of identifying some of the core strengths and weaknesses. I also like the idea about transparency, clarity, reliability. Another thing that stuck with me was also this idea of leader fit. So it's not every leader would be appropriate for agile transformation, and this is something that needs to be taken into account. That you really need to find a person who will fit into this framework of agile transformation. And sometimes if there's not a good match, then maybe something has to be done about this. And then, well, she is one of the not that many people who really made it international from Finland, right? So I think there were really kind of nice practical advices about how what to take on board.
How Finns
Ten-
can move abroad and
10 ways to say no without saying no. I think it was really
It's fun.
fun. Yes,
That sounds like another T-shirt.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I really loved spending time with her. I like how clear she is. I also think it's really interesting that, the first one I would have to say is that the cost of delay. That's such a, I can't believe I haven't heard that before. That's such an intuitive message. It's one all leaders and all businesses will get straight off the bat. The second one was, she talks quite a lot about HR, but if you step back and look at what's actually happening with the people she supports, she's not talking about HR. She's talking about reshaping the people in a company, reshaping the way they work, the way they approach things, the way they decide things together. She's talking about leadership. She's talking about a specific way to lead people, which I think, as she mentioned, is kind of like inherently Finnish. There's a big amount of sort of Finnish identity all over this agile approach, where there's not a lot of hierarchy, not a lot of steps, a lot of pragmatism, a lot of, straightforward decision making and straightforward, clear communication. So I thought it was interesting both to go through kind of what she was talking about on face value, but it was also an interesting observation that she talked about HR a lot, but every time she was talking, I heard leadership. So. Good. Okay. That'll do us for this one. Again, thank you, Annalie and Alexei. Fantastic.
Thank you, Mark.
It was great to have Riina, so thanks to her. Thanks to everybody who's listening for listening. Thanks to Fat Lizard for giving us the fantastic inspiration and the place to meet and the beer that you're going to send us. I can almost taste it. And thanks again to Bella behind the mics and behind the camera for keeping us all professional and sounding the way we do. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
See you later.